What's going on, guys? Welcome here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Moradiege, wrapping up to the week this week on today, Friday, with more NFL stories coming to you from the draft, the NFL Draft Combine, and just all the stories coming from a bunch of different sources. We got the Arizona Cardinals and their general manager, what he said in regards to the number 4 overall pick. Then later in the show, I'm going to dive into the NFL and them sort of solidifying more of their NFL rule change proposals and ironing out any sort of doubts and things. They got it all figured out. Now it just takes all the owners and everyone at the meeting to vote on it. That's coming up. Then, on the second half of the show, I'm going to be going into some free agents, some of the best free agents left over, and where I think they'll end up signing, which team fits them best. And then to wrap up the entire show, wrap up the week, Caleb Williams had his pro day a few days ago. I'm going to talk about what he did and some of the reactions that were sparked after his drills and some of the conversations that were had around his performance. All of that coming up on today's episode. And before I get into the chip shot story, as always, I want to remind you guys one time before I start the show to please use the tip and donations link with any questions or comments that you may have. You can use the tip and donations link at gsmcpodcast.net running across the ticker below me. Make sure I can see the question here to my right and I'm able to read it, interact with you guys, have a conversation, maybe even if you guys want to engage more with any of the segments. It's a lot of fun that way, in my opinion, and we always appreciate it here at the network anytime any of you guys are able to do that with your questions. Saying that, I can jump into the first segment, the chip shot story of the day, and revolving around the Arizona Cardinals and what their general manager said recently. There's not too much talk going on right now in terms of trades and player transactions because of how crazy the first week was, obviously. Things have sort of died down. That was supposed to be expected. And now you have more speculation, more guessing, and just questions going forward on, like I mentioned, the rule changes. But where Cardinals general manager Monty Austinfort was asked about that number 4 pick. And it's very intriguing because of the fact that, people after the 4 pick, after the Cardinals select, or really after that top 3 selection, people are going to want to anticipate those picks and want to get their hands on those picks potentially because of all the intrigue around wide receivers, quarterbacks for some teams. So that number 4 pick and even the number 5 pick too, to some extent, basically the same thing there. It's going to be very, very well scouted for, very well touted for. People are going to want their hands on it. And they asked the Cardinals general manager, Monty Austinfort, about it, specifically about trading it or if he's had any conversations around that pick and potentially moving on from it. To which he said, I'd say those phone calls are starting to pick up a little bit. I would say they'll probably continue until next week when we go down to Florida for the owners meeting. But honestly, they probably will not get real until we get right up until the week of the draft, similar to last year. And, that makes sense. There's still pro days going on. Michigan's pro day was today. There was Texas's pro day, Alabama's pro day. All those were going on this week. That's what really made the headlines this week with Caleb Williams as well. I'll get into that later in the show. But, those still have to go on. The official visits still have to happen for some of the higher touted players like the quarterbacks. I'm sure they still have to take the top 30 visits. There has been some other official visits, but all the attention will go to some of the bigger fish in this whole NFL draft, like the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, like I mentioned, especially yesterday coming off of Marvin Harrison not participating in his pro day, going in for an official visit for whatever amount of teams that he has lined up. That's going to be a big part because it is very isolated and it's very personal in how these teams, especially for some of the higher guys in this draft, go about their meetings and what sort of questions they ask them. They really try to get to know the person as well as all the other football stuff. I think those meetings are very important, and it just irons out any sort of little doubts that these general managers, coaches might have about these prospects. The official visits are a good spot to do that. And then other than that, teams still have to finalize their boards. It obviously goes way further and more in depth than the first couple rounds. So teams obviously would want to have all of that ironed out and figured out before they get into talking, oh, what happens now if we trade up? What happens if they take this player? They got to figure out which players they're targeting before they can start gauging where they might fall. And they have to identify their needs. And that's the biggest thing for the Cardinals, and I think for Austin Fort, their general manager, talking the way he did and answering the way he did, because this team hasn't been very competitive really in the NFC West. They're not really a contender in any sort of facet that people will want to talk about, but they have some potential there. You can kind of see what they're trying to build under Jonathan Gannon with James Conner. He's a solid running back. Kyler Murray looking better towards the end of the year after suffering that injury that kind of kept him out to start the year. And then you have some players in there. Their defense is looking all right. It could be better, but other than that, they just traded away Rondale Moore as well, so he's gone, and you don't really have too much to work there. So they're a team, much like the top three teams, that could use a lot of stock and a lot of draft capital to help them out a lot more than a lot of people would want to think, instead of just taking the highest available player. So he's still open to it. I am sure that he is well aware of the lack of skill set and ability compared to all the other teams, especially in the NFC, that this team is needing. But as well, at number 4, if you want to break it down, and if you were the Cardinals, if I'm Monty Austin Fort, you want to look at it and when is the next time you're going to get a Marvin Harrison, a Malik Neighbors, or a Rome Odunze at number 4. You hope not to be there, but when you're there and you're seeing all the players that are available to you, that's very tempting. But, you look at any other teams that would want to trade up that far. It all really depends on what they get back. If they look at this position that they are, how high do they value the 4 pick? A lot of people would want a lot back from it, but with the Cardinals and where you see them at, they might take those 2 first-round picks from the Vikings, and I would probably assume at least the second next year, if not 3 firsts would be a lot, in my opinion. But that, if they offered that, I'm sure the Cardinals would absolutely take that. But I think the 2 first rounds this year and a second round next year could be something that the Vikings could offer, for an example of a team that wants to trade up that far to get a quarterback potentially. The Giants are another one. They sit at 6, but is J.J. McCarthy going to be gone by there? If the Vikings say they jump up and jump over the Giants up to the 4 spot and they take J.J. McCarthy, and then you're kind of left with Michael Penix, assuming that the first 3 picks are quarterbacks, like most people have them mocked. If the first 3 picks are the quarterbacks, then J.J. goes at 4. The Giants, they had a lot of interest in J.J., it seemed. They brought him in. They gave him a tour of the whole facility. Same with Drake May. They had him in for a visit as well. And those 2 guys could be gone. So how much do you value them and their positioning in the draft? Just 2 spots back. It doesn't seem like that much, but it all depends on who jumps you and who takes that opportunity before you do. And that could be huge as well. The Raiders are another team that are also in need of a quarterback. They sit at third. They sit at 13, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they sit at 13, and they don't have as much to offer as the Vikings or the Giants, even. But could they pull something out? I wouldn't be surprised if they just went all in. But that's up to them and where they see it. If they invest a lot in giving up a lot and trading up in this draft, they have to make sure that this quarterback is their guy. So I think that might be a bit too steep for them to give up so much and move up that far, especially. And another sneaky team could be the Broncos, just because they haven't done anything, quite frankly, and they're arguably one of the worst or most trending down team in the NFL right now. They haven't really made any signings. They've had that whole Russell Wilson situation, so they have to still figure things out of where they want to go with this team, and they haven't really done anything. At 12, a lot of people have them penciled in for drafting Bo Nix or Michael Penix or someone like that, and that's fine if they really like him, but one of the top, definitely more talented quarterbacks are up there. Again, similar to the Raiders, they're not in a spot right now where I think they can give up too much. They don't have that many assets, so they are there, but you don't really believe it until you figure out what in the world they've given up. And this is all talking about quarterbacks because the Vikings, after they traded for that second first-round pick, a lot of people speculated that they're the number one team to trade up for a quarterback at 4. But who's to say somebody doesn't beat them out because they want a better receiver? What if the Jets or the Bears at number 9 trade back up a little bit because they want to make sure they get a great wide receiver for Caleb Williams if you're the Bears, or another wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers if you're the New York Jets trading up from 10. So if they jump up to 4 and jump the Giants and they jump the Los Angeles Chargers, how does that all switch up? It's not just the value around quarterbacks. A lot of teams are looking to jump up potentially for another receiver or another playmaker because those guys are so talented and they've been hyped up so much. Teams just in that area, in the top 10, could all mostly use a wide receiver or a quarterback, and just outside the top 10. So it'll be interesting to see who actually goes up to the Cardinals and offers maybe the most, or offers it first and just continues to be on them about this trade. All of that, those little nuances and those little details don't really don't gain as much attention in storylines and just how important those are behind the scenes. But it just drops on you, and then everyone's scrambling to figure out how did it get to this point. And I think that's very interesting in how it all develops. And just on the last thing I'll say about this is that the Cardinals, in my opinion, are sort of doing it the right way because of how their general manager is really orchestrating their process. He's saying that it's intriguing. He's saying that he's open to it, but he's going to most likely wait. When he said it's probably not going to get real until the week right up to the NFL draft. So if you want to compare it to how the Bears handled their whole Justin Fields situation, you can look at that and think that they went a little bit too early and just took whatever deal just to get him off their books. Comparing those two situations, I think the Cardinals are doing better than what the Bears did with Justin Fields because of the fact that they've come out and they've said, we're not really entertaining anything until the week up to the draft, because they know, like most people do anticipate, anything could happen in these next few weeks. And because of that, a lot of scenarios will change. Someone could sign a big free agent, then they don't need to trade. Someone could make another trade for another player, and then that situation's fixed. You don't really know what's going to happen until draft night, quite honestly, where people are really settled in to know what they want to do. And I think the Cardinals are handling it very well. They're orchestrating this very well, keeping teams on their toes a little bit. I'm sure they're not going to show their cards that much until the week of it. I think Monty Austinfort is doing a great job of that. And I just think if I were to pick a team to trade, I think it would be the Cardinals. Not so much the Chargers, because I think they'd allow someone to trade to number 4, take a wide receiver, and then I think they'd be happy with Odunze, Neighbors, or Harrison, whoever doesn't get picked at 4. Or maybe they they get lucky and the Vikings trade up to 4 and get a quarterback, and they still can get whatever wide receiver they like. So between those two, I think the Chargers aren't really needing of a trade. Their general manager has said they're open to it, but really I don't think they'll end up moving. I think more people will want to reassure their team and move up to 4 and make sure they get that receiver or quarterback that could potentially change their team for the better going forward. We shall see how that plays out. But I'll be moving on to the next topic now. We'll put a pin in that, and I'm sure we'll revisit that later on. But for now, we'll head into the first break of the show. And after that break, I'm going to jump into the details surrounding the NFL rule change proposals. They've been ironed out. They've become a bit more specific, and I want to get into all of those, as well as free agent fits with all the remaining free agents left on the market, and my takeaways from Caleb Williams' pro day a few days ago. All of that, all the details coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into more of the NFL rule changes that have been solidified a bit more over this past week, with the NFL owners meeting coming up, I think just next week, next Friday, if I'm not mistaken. They're going to talk about a whole bunch of topics and potential rule changes that teams can propose, and some of the bigger ones that they're going to vote on as well. Before, a few weeks ago, when I first started this show, I talked about some of the rule changes and some crazy, some wild proposals that teams suggested, but now that all these have sort of been worked through, they've thought about them, they've thought of consequences, and they've thought of how they want this verbiage to come out to all the players. Now we have the official proposals that these teams will vote on at the NFL owners meeting, and as a reminder, they need 24 out of the 32 owners to vote on one favor to either pass or decline the proposal of this rule change. And there are some pretty big ones in here. I will start with probably the biggest one, the hip drop tackle, that has become a bit of the major talking point recently among all the players that have taken to social media to voice their disagreement with this. And, the NFL, I think, has made this the biggest one that they want to talk about, at least because of all the injuries that you see because of a hip drop tackle. And you just think back to Mark Andrews, I think Tony Pollard as well. Maybe not this season, but before that. Just two of the biggest players on two of the biggest teams now being hindered because of these sort of tackles. And the way the NFL sort of broke this down, this was all according to Jonathan Jones from CBS Sports, their NFL insider, and how he broke it down on an article I read, just how the NFL is viewing it. Initially, they're proposing that if they do deem a tackle a hip drop tackle, it will be enforced as a 15-yard penalty, so I would assume as an unnecessary roughness penalty, and it would also result in an automatic first down. Two pretty big things there, obviously. If that was to be the penalty for this, it just shows you how much the NFL is really valuing this sort of tackle. They almost want to completely get rid of it and not even see it performed out there. Same thing with face masks and horse collars, but I think I don't know, those are more obvious to tell. And with the hip drop tackle, you can see how they want to get rid of it, but now getting into the definition and how really tricky this could get, the NFL provided a potential definition for this, and it is when a player grabs the runner with both hands or wraps the runner with both arms and unweights himself, swiveling and dropping his hips and or lower body, landing and trapping the runner's legs at or below the knee. So that's the specifics on the rule. That's what a player would have to do to deem this a hip drop tackle. And it seems pretty clear, right, with all the words and how specific they want to make it with their hands and their arms and unweighting themselves. Some of these words are kind of weird, honestly, because it's a lot easier said than seeing it play out. Trying to prevent a player from unweighing himself and swiveling his hips out and just being dead weight on another player trying to bring the runner down. That all is very specific, and you really have to think about doing that and trying to fit this into the rules. You're really making a defender overthink a tackle that has been so routine for them since they were, in Pee Wee football and since they first started playing football. The goal is tackle the ball runner any way you can. Obviously keeping it clean, not going to take him out, right? But wrapping him up and then just bringing him down. It all becomes more instinctive. Players play better through instinct and not even thinking, just doing it all, reacting to it. I think now, with all these rule changes, I know they're trying to make it safer and for players to actually play, have all the stars out there. They're making it really, really a thinking game and thinking of how to tackle a guy. Am I supposed to do it this way? Am I supposed to not put this much weight on him? How much are they going to consider this a hip drop tackle? All of these things, I think, just starts to hinder the game a little bit. And with this definition being so specific, when they replay it, for example, or if people see it, it just becomes more of a talking point that takes away from the game, which is one of the biggest points I wanted to make. With all these penalties that could affect the game, if it's a hip drop there, I could see this potentially happening at least 2 to 3 times a game, and then that really affects how a defense performs. Now they're being hindered, they get a great stop, but then they throw the flag and it all gets wiped away because they considered it a hip drop tackle. And then the next day you have more people talking about how this one play, how a bad decision or a right decision affected the game, rather than focusing on great plays that were made, great defensive stops, a great offensive play, great scheme and stuff like that. Going this route, trying to make it more safe, too much, I think will take away from the game and take away people's attention from talking about the actual game of football, and it'll all go into talking about, penalties and how this could have affected the game this way, this could have affected it the other way. It's kind of weird right now. The NFLPA has voiced their displeasure about it. I mentioned Cam Jordan and Darius Slay were among some of the players that took to social media and didn't like it. And the NFLPA were really worried about the potential subjectivity of this call, how one ref could see it, another one can't see it. Those sort of things, I think that'll be the biggest thing that, I don't think it'll get passed, but that'll be the biggest thing that is brought to the table, how subjective this is. There's already a lot of penalties against the defense, so on adding this on top of it, how are they really going to tackle someone if they're overthinking it, and then by overthinking it, they might do something else wrong, not consider the other consequences of all the other penalties that go against the defense. So that's where that stands. The hip drop tackle, I get it, it is dangerous, but you can only do so much to prevent a player from not hurting someone without changing the game completely. This is football at the end of the day. It's dangerous. People will get hurt. I think they're trying to avoid anybody getting hurt, and that's just almost impossible in a game like this. But again, that's what the NFL is trending now towards, trying to be more safe, but they could be overdoing it a little bit, in my opinion, with the hip drop tackle. Then, in my opinion, my favorite one that could change, and I hope that it does go this way, is the whole breakdown and setup of the kickoffs. Trying to change it, make it more exciting, because last year, with the fair catch rule that was added to last season just to try it out, you could fair catch it anywhere, and then basically everybody did that, and there was no more real kickoffs. It would all went through the back of the end zone anyway for touchbacks, so there was that, and if they did field it, people didn't think it was worth running it back and losing some yards potentially, so they didn't do it. And that takes away from the game, the excitement. Probably one of the more exciting things is seeing a guy just break through that sea of bodies and get into just plains of open grass and scoring. That changes the momentum. That's a huge thing. And what the NFL has proposed that they were going to be voting on is that one thing that the kicking team could do is not moving until the ball is kicked or fielded in the landing zone, which they've designated to be the receiving team's 20-yard line to the goal line. So that area, that 20-yard area of the receiving team, that's the landing spot. So the kicking team's not allowed to move until it either lands there or the ball is kicked. I'm sure they're going to decide on that more at the meeting. And other than that, the teams are only allowed 2 returners in that zone, so they can't call for a fair catch also in that zone. If the ball lands in there or if the player fields it in there, they have to return it. There's no more fair catching it. They tried it out last year. It didn't work out the way they wanted it to, so they got rid of it. And if the ball does land in there, the 2 returners, either one of them has to return it in that case. And on top of that, other scenarios that could happen is if the ball doesn't reach the zone, it goes out of bounds, or it just stops before going into the landing zone. The ball would end up at the 40-yard line, and that's where the drive would start. Or if the ball is kicked into the end zone and down in the end zone, or as a touchback, the ball would go to the 35-yard line. And another scenario that could happen is if it lands in the zone and rolls into the end zone. So if it lands in the landing zone and then just ends up in the end zone after that, and the returner's down in the end zone, the ball would just start at the 20-yard line. And onside kicks also fall under this category, I guess, as well, because just, it's not too big of a deal anyway. They couldn't figure out another scenario to make it more exciting, so they've just put it under the same category with the kickoffs. And the only real difference with this that they've tried to do is that the team that's trying to kick an onside kick has to let the receiving team know that they're going to attempt one, and they can only do it in the fourth quarter if they're losing. So it all falls under this kickoff resetting sort of umbrella, and I hope that really does happen, because the way it was all set up with the landing zone, not letting the kicking team move until the ball is kicked or somebody fields it, I think will make it more exciting, probably more safe, because it actually gives the receiving team a chance now to actually run and try to get some positive yards and get the fans seeing some exciting plays. So I think that's great. And starting the ball from the 40, if it's basically, they haven't really changed that, honestly, if you think about it. If it doesn't reach the zone or if it's kicked out of bounds, it ends up, I think, on the 40 anyway. So that one's pretty much the same. The 35-yard line is the only one that's really different. If the ball is kicked past the end zone as a touchback, or it's downed in the end zone directly, it will go to the 35. So again, pushing for more offense, seeing more of that is always good and always on the NFL's mind. And another one that went into more detail would be a scenario where a quarterback throws a pass, and if he was down or if he was out of bounds and the refs got it wrong and they said that he wasn't out of bounds and they counted the pass as legal, they said he wasn't down or out of bounds, they can review that. And what they're trying to change is if the quarterback, say, was ruled down or he was out of bounds, but he actually wasn't, he completed the throw in time before he was down or out of bounds, that actually can't be reviewed. You can review it one way if the refs said that he threw it and it did count, they can review their mistake. But if he actually wasn't down and everybody sees that he wasn't down, but they called it down, originally they couldn't review that, but now that's being looked at as a play that can be reviewed. Honestly, I don't know why it wouldn't be reviewed either way, because it is basically the same thing. But apparently you couldn't review it, so that's another thing. And the last thing I will say will be something that seems obvious, but they are going to vote on it, is using the replay review to see if a game clock expired before the snap. And I say the game clock, not the play clock, because I think it was a time last year where I think it was the Packers and the Lions were playing, and the game clock expired to end the third quarter, and the play went on. They counted the play as fair, that it happened before it expired, and it hindered the Lions, I think, in that game. They were clearly upset a lot by it, but they couldn't go back and review that. Almost like the NBA, when you see a last-second shot go up, they review it to see if it was before the buzzer or not. I don't know why they haven't done that in the NFL, but now they're trying to incorporate that so situations like that don't happen and don't affect the game as much. Those could be easily avoided, and that's one I think that should pass. Like I mentioned, it is kind of like the NBA. These plays matter with the game clock, and I want to stress again, it is just the game clock, not the play clock, because it gets too complicated with that. Saying a guy hiked it or snapped it before the play clock, I think, would make too much of an issue where there shouldn't be one. So those are the biggest ones that were really talked about the most: the kickoff, the hip drop tackle, and the quarterbacks throwing it, replay review being incorporated more into the gameplay and into the NFL. I would love to know what you guys think about the potential rule changes, if you really hate them, if you really love them, or if you want to comment on other rule changes that you would love to see in the NFL. That would also be great. But in saying that, I will send it to another break now, and on the other side of that, I will bring you my best free agent fits for some of the best free agents left on the market, and stick around towards the end as well, where I'm going to talk about Caleb Williams and his pro day. You're not going to want to miss all of that, because stick around, and all of that is coming up next.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the free agency market and how it's died down a little bit. I'm going to get into my best fits for some of the best free agent market players left over. But before I do that, one last time on this episode, I want to remind all you guys, if you have any questions, comments, or want to say anything just in regards to the segment, please use the tip and donations link at gsmcpodcast.net with any of your questions. It ensures that I'm able to see them. They pop up on the right-hand side in my chat box, and we could react to something, have a conversation if you guys have any questions. I love that. I think it makes it more fun. And again, if you can't see it on the screen and you're just listening to this episode, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. We always appreciate it. It's a big help for the show anytime you guys are able to use that link with any of your questions. Going back now to the topic at hand, the best free agents left on the market. There's tons of free agents, obviously. There's too many to count and really keep track of. A lot of good players left out there, but I've rounded up the 7 to 6 best players I think that are still out there, and I would probably assume are going to be the next ones off the market, in my opinion. So, starting with one of the biggest ones, Tyler Boyd, the wide receiver formerly of the Cincinnati Bengals. He could end up back there, but it doesn't look like it because of how they're dealing with T. Higgins, trying to get a deal worked out with him potentially. And quite frankly, they might not have enough money to pay Tyler Boyd. He is getting now to the 30-year-old mark. So do they want him back? That's another debate. But it doesn't look like he'll come back. And in my opinion, the biggest or the best fit for him would be just to stay in the AFC North with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're the team I've seen him linked mostly with. There's interest from the Chiefs as well as the New York Jets, but they've just signed also Marquise Brown in respect to the Chiefs and Mike Williams in respect to the New York Jets. So, they've paid those guys enough already. With the Jets, I could see the Jets because they just got Mike Williams and they have Garrett Wilson. You could add something there, but you already have Allen Lazard kind of filling out that slot receiver role for the Jets that Tyler Boyd is very good at. So do they really need him? And then for the Chiefs, they have Rashee Rice. They brought in Marquise Brown. Already enough targets go to Travis Kelce. How would he fit into that offense? Is there enough of the ball to share among those guys, plus the touches that Isaiah Pacheco gets? Quite frankly, I think they're better throwing the ball less and trying to play through him. But that's just my opinion. I think it makes the most sense for the Steelers because Tyler Boyd knows the division. He's from the Pittsburgh area. He's a big fan of Mike Tomlin. Who's not a fan of Mike Tomlin? So that's not really saying too much. But other than that, there's not too much interest elsewhere. And I think the longer this just plays out, I think the more likely it is that he'll just go with what's familiar to him and maybe take less money. I'm sure the Steelers would love that. But to me, he fits best there. And it doesn't stop the Steelers from finding another wide receiver or another weapon, potentially through the draft, to bolster that wide receiver room as well. Moving on to my next free agent target, player still available, Stephon Gilmore. Last season played with the Dallas Cowboys until he got hurt, unfortunately for him. And now he is on the older side as well. So I'm sure one of his biggest priorities is playing for a team that gives him the best chance of winning. And in saying that, I first wanted to say the Cardinals because they would definitely need a player, a talent like Stephon Gilmore. But thinking it more over, I think the Lions made a lot more sense after not only they signed Carlton Davis, so they already knew that this was a need. They addressed it a little bit with Carlton Davis, but you can't have too many corners on your team, basically. So Carlton Davis is a experienced veteran. I think bringing in another guy like Stephon Gilmore, keeping the talent level up to a standard, at least for a year or two, you're going all in on this team, and I think that would work out best because it gives him the best chance of a Super Bowl just because he's older. And they just released their cornerback 1, cornerback 2, however you wanted to see it, Cameron Sutton, because of his involvement, potentially, allegedly, in a domestic violence case, I think down in Florida. So the Lions released him a few days ago. And with all that going on, they lost a defensive back. So why not go out and get one of the best ones left on the market? I think it makes a lot of sense. It would make their team better because, in my opinion, you're increasing the skill there at that position. And I would love to see that move for the Lions heading into further into this offseason. Moving into another secondary guy, Justin Simmons, arguably the best safety left on this market and probably will be the most expensive guy on there because of his contract that he is on right now. I think he's on an annual salary of $14 or $11 million between that range. So he will come at a cost a little bit more, but you won't see the deals that Xavier McKinney will get because that's his first big deal. I don't expect his contract to stay at around 14 to 11. But he will be more expensive than a Deshaun Elliott that went to the Steelers, as well as how else the safety market is looking. And a team that I think would fit him the best could be either the Colts or the Titans. I would probably say more the Colts just because of the way that they're trending. Honestly, they're both trending up, but with the Titans, I think there's more unfamiliar pieces. You don't really know what you're going to get out of Will Levis. You got Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins there, which is going to help. But I think with the Colts, you have a bit more security there in the organization. The team, their defense is a bit more reliable for me. And on top of that, with the Colts, they were able to keep Kenny Moore. But unfortunately, I think, just in my opinion, I think they will lose Julian Blackmon, their other talented secondary player. He's taken some visits recently, and I just don't see the Colts bringing him back. And I think Justin Simmons would be the perfect replacement to come in and play right away, have that experience, really lead that young secondary. I think would do them wonders. So Justin Simmons to the Colts, pencil that in. I love that move. I think that one's really likely to happen, which transitions me now into talking now about Julian Blackmon, another one of those talented safeties on the market right now. He's taken visits with the Bills and the 49ers, which makes sense because the Bills just released Jordan Poyer, so there's a big need there. And the 49ers as well. They've released Tashawn Gibson, one of their safeties. So he could fit into either one of those teams. But the team I went with was the 49ers because Julian Blackmon is still pretty young. I think he's 26 or 25, coming off of his rookie deal. But he has been forced to deal with injuries that have held him back a little bit and really prevented him from showing his full potential because he goes 100% when he's out there. But a lot of times it gets him in injury problems and he has to deal with that. So because he's not really shown too much of it or shown a lot to give him this massive contract like a Darnell Savage or an Xavier McKinney got, I think I could see him going more to the 49ers on a cheaper deal, 2 to 3 years maybe 1 to 2, proving himself more, playing really well on a defense that doesn't really need too much. And if he plays well and the defense looks great, he's a big part of that. I think later either the 49ers will give him a big contract or it'll work out best for him and another team will just end up giving him another big contract if he stays healthy, which is the biggest thing. But the 49ers makes the most sense to me. That's the most recent team he visited with. So if no more reports come out, I'm just going to assume he's going to go there. A lot of teams would want to join that team. So it makes the most sense. A surprising one, maybe for a few people, now could be J.K. Dobbins. A lot of people don't think about him when they mention all the running backs on the market. Nobody really brought up Dobbins, but he's only 25 years old. And the scariest thing, right, is the injuries. He's only played in 9 games since the start of 2021. But you can't really deny when he is out there, in those 9 games, he does look great. He looks explosive. He gets in and out of his cuts well. He reads the running lanes well as well. He can catch out of the backfield. He had great success at Ohio State. And I just think he is very talented. I've seen him a lot being a Steelers fan and seeing him be part of the Ravens and how he complemented Lamar and their offense. I think he has a lot of potential still there. It's very unlucky that he's had to deal with the knee injuries and stuff like that. But I think he's still so young that somebody should want to sign him because of how well he plays when he is healthy. And in that mindset, going down that lane, I think pairing him up with somebody similar to him dealing with injuries shouldn't be a bell cow kind of running back. I think the best situation for him could be the Vikings. If he went to the Vikings and he stayed a little bit more healthy than he has been, pairing him up with Aaron Jones, I think would end up great for this offense because then not only do you spot Aaron Jones when he needs it, you spot J.K. Dobbins when he needs a rest. The talent level doesn't really drop off with either of those backs. They still have a very good offensive line. Justin Jefferson is obviously still there. I was really impressed with Jordan Addison. T.J. Hawkinson is a great tight end. not only do they complement their offense well, but it strengthens the idea of them drafting a quarterback. And if you draft a rookie quarterback to come into that situation with all those weapons, 2 great running backs, 2 great receivers, and an awesome tight end, great offensive line, I don't think you could argue at that point there's no other better place for a rookie quarterback to go than the Minnesota Vikings. And that whole script, their whole idea of, oh my God, we lost Kirk Cousins, we're doomed, it flips on its head because you complemented the rest of the offense. And if this rookie quarterback turns out to be who you wanted it to be, who you think can lead you into success, it all works out perfectly if they sign J.K. Dobbins and complement their offense that way. And it'll do great for Dobbins as well. Like I mentioned, they have a great O-line. And I don't think he should be getting 20 to 15 carries a game. It hasn't worked out for him as well. So I think that would be the most likely fit for him. And just to round it out, Xavier Howard, I've mentioned him before on YouTube Shorts or in just briefly in segments. He makes the most sense to me to go to the Houston Texans. He is from Texas. He was released by the Dolphins, and the Texans need a defensive back now because they released Steven Nelson, and Xavier Howard is younger than Steven Nelson. In my opinion, he's better. He gives you more. He's dealt with injuries, but, it's not been too crazy where he's missed a ton of games every season that he's been in the league. The seasons that he has been healthy, I think there's no question that there's only really 3 to 4 guys better than him. And for him to join that young, exciting Texans team overall with the additions of Danielle Hunter, Joe Mixon, I think it would work out best for the Houston Texans, solidify their defense because DeMeco Ryans is that defensive sort of coach, wants a good defense. Adding him to that squad would be very great for them, exciting, and really push them into real contention in this AFC with how great CJ Stroud looked and how great Tank Dell looked, Nico Collins looked. I think it'll all work out perfect for them if they were to add this secondary help for their defense. And that's it. Those are the biggest guys I think left on the market. I would love to know if you guys agree with those team fits that I laid out there. I think those make the most sense to me, and I would love to see all those guys not only go to those teams, but I think those are the places where they'll likely find the most success heading into next season. But in saying that, I will end that segment there, and I will transition into the last break before I talk about Caleb Williams' Pro Day and everything I took away from his performance, what people were saying afterwards, which teams met with him before and after his Pro Day. All of that, all those details coming up right here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you guys for joining me for this last segment of the show, talking about one of the most anticipated pro days in the last few years with Caleb Williams, not only because he is super talented, exciting prospect that everyone wants to get a look into, but because he didn't work out at the combine, pushing it, increasing the level of anticipation and wanting to see him out there, how he looks on the field, throwing to his receivers. All of that was built up to this moment, and there was a lot of teams there, representatives there to see Williams throw at his pro day. And other than showing off the arm talent and just how he performs out there, and just on his skill set and his arm talent, a big thing that he stressed, and I think a lot of analysts and a lot of scouts wanted to see, was his consistency and in the pocket throws, because I think a lot of times people, and he said it in an interview, I think with NFL on ESPN with Louis Riddick, I think he mentioned it, how if you throw on his highlights and if people want to get to know or learn about Caleb Williams, they'll look him up. And on YouTube, you see all these crazy throws, him outside the pocket, throwing across his body, throwing 50 miles down the field. All that looks great and all, but, he wanted to go out there and show his consistency, the fundamentals, and in the pocket throws, because those are obviously still important. It's not likely that he's going to make all those plays in the NFL. It's a different level in the NFL. That's obvious. And for him to always be making these kind of throws, it's not really logical. So quieting the naysayers, quieting those doubts about him in the pocket, his feet movement, his ball placement, his timing and all that, I think those were the biggest things that people wanted to see. And it's funny how that works, because a lot of times in these pro days, you see guys making these crazy throws. It goes viral. Then their stock rises even more. It's funny how it's the other way now, and people are going there to not see those throws and want to see Caleb, tone it down a little bit and see what he's like in the pocket, standing still, and what his timing is like and all of that. And I think that's super interesting, and it just credits to him, because people already know you can do all the crazy stuff, all the abnormal stuff. They just want to see you do what all these other guys can do, all the normal things, and make sure if you can do that at a high level, it's all wrapped up there. You're going to go number one if you can do that. And he showed that he could do that at a high level with his receivers there at the USC Pro Day. Funny, right before it all started, that they had to change a lot of it, weirdly, because one of the receivers actually got hurt. He was nursing an injury leading up to it, and they had to change some of the routes, cut some of them out, and sort of change the script that they wanted to put on display for everybody. That could have been a catastrophic thing, honestly, because these quarterbacks go into this with a plan in their head. They know what it's all going to be like, and for it to change there right before it all started, some quarterbacks could panic, and it could throw them off a lot because of that big change. And one of the scouts actually praised Caleb Williams for his easygoing attitude and adjusting to it right away. He said pretty much the same sentiment, that all the quarterbacks have practiced this so much, and they would have handled that differently. Some handle it better than others. Caleb was fine. He was going with the flow. It was easy for him. And I think that also touches on another thing that these scouts and people wanted to see. On top of all the throws and the football-related stuff, I think people were impressed and taken back a little bit, honestly, with Caleb's attitude and his personality showing out on the field. He was smiling a lot with all of his receivers. And again, just looking back at some of the interviews that he did, one of the biggest things that he said that is really important to him is taking care of his guys, making sure his guys are good, making sure they're having fun out there, they're enjoying the game, not really putting too much pressure on them. I think that showed out a lot in his pro day, just showing his personality and how really easy he makes it look sometimes, and how much better he can make everyone around him, which is the biggest thing when you're taking on all the pressures of carrying an organization. To make it look that easy, I think speaks volumes to him as a player, but also as a person. And another scout also touched on that. From the AFC, they said he carried himself really well. All of these pro days kind of take a life of their own. Today's pro day with Caleb kind of took on his personality. Easygoing, really calm, nothing rattles him. Just sharing that same sentiment I did just then. I think that's the biggest thing with Caleb. I keep touching on it before at the Combine when he spoke to the media. Some of those things, I've seen reactions from other analysts or people that just talk about the NFL. The way he answers some questions, when people ask why he's not working out, and he'll say, the tape's out there if you have any doubts, that rubs people the wrong way. Inevitably, it just does for some people. It doesn't sit well with them. So I think now seeing him in a more natural environment for him, you could really see what kind of person he is. And he doesn't look like it. I don't know the guy, but he doesn't look like a guy that's too high on himself. He seems very humble the way he talks about his teammates and stuff like that. And I think that's huge for the scouts and GMs all to see there. And specifically the guys that were there. Obviously, the Bears had the most representatives there. I think they had about 10 or 12-ish people there. The Commanders were also there, and the Patriots had the least amount of representatives there, but they were also there. And the Bears really went all out, and I wasn't surprised to see all the things they did, but to see them talk to his dad, talk to head coach Lincoln Riley, they took him out to dinner leading up to his pro day. That's interesting because leading up to his pro day, Caleb told all the teams that were going to be there that he would make time for them after the workouts, after his pro day. But according to NFL Network, he made the exception just for the Bears. Only the Chicago Bears had contact with him before his pro day, and they were able to find time with him. And that's, interesting in the sense that if you didn't think the Bears were going to draft him, this all but solidifies it even more. And going into detail, one of the reporters from the Chicago Tribune, Brad Biggs, also went into more detail about what this contact was like before their pro day, what this interaction was like. Actually, on Tuesday, before his pro day, that was on Wednesday, he said, on Tuesday, the team spent nearly half the day on campus with Williams at the football facility, talking ball, doing work on the whiteboard, and watching film. Williams' attention to detail struck the Bears. He was the one taking notes, not the team officials. And I didn't know that. That's a big piece of just actions that happened with Caleb, and how much you can see how much the Bears really care about this. They're the team that spent the most time with him, and I think Caleb, in one aspect, knows that, if he'll be drafted to any team, he'll be happy, but he's making sure that he's making an exception for the Bears. He's showing his best behavior for the Bears, not trying to not be himself, but going all out a little bit more to show the Bears what kind of person that he is and what kind of professional that he is by taking notes, doing work on the whiteboards, watching film, getting to know him more on a personal level. I think that's smart by both parties. The Bears get to see what he's really like, and Caleb is doing, them a favor and making the exception for them, showing them that he truly is and would be invested in them if they were to draft them. And I think that was cool to see. All these things that happen when nobody's really paying attention. The Bears are spending a lot more time with them, so that's good. And also, when I saw the video, Caleb Williams walking in, dapping up everybody, giving a handshake to everyone, I didn't know that when he went over and hugged Keenan Allen, that was Keenan Allen until it was pointed out to me. And, how much do you want to do to show that the Bears are going to draft him, number one overall? There are new wide receivers there to see his new quarterback potentially throw the ball around. They have the most people there. They're going to continue to talk to him about the team on a personal level, and that's sort of the next step now in this whole process with Caleb Williams. He didn't say which teams he was going to go on a official visit with, but he said he's ironing it out, and the Bears are obviously going to be one of them. They're going to bring him into Hollis Hall in Chicago on a top 30 visit where, like I mentioned at the start of the show, they can have a more in-depth conversation with him, show him around the facility, get him acclimated, I guess you could say, a little bit with the city and what it's like, how it looks around the facility and stuff like that. They'll get to know him a little bit more personally, I'm sure. But the biggest thing could be his medicals, just because he didn't provide them for anybody at the combine, and that was looked at as a big thing. People, if they're not going to work out, at least they'll show you or give their medicals. He didn't do either of that because he stood on the fact that, not everyone's going to get the chance to draft him, so why would he show and share his medicals with everybody if only a few teams are going to do it? So that was a big talking point at the combine, and now they're officially going to see where he's at physically, not combine wise, but just where he's at. If he's all good physically, there's nothing really more to say about Caleb Williams and where he'll end up. I think the Bears are just making it more and more obvious, and I think they should. I like it that they're just really not taking anything for granted. They're not really being sneaky about it. They have the number one pick, so they really decide how this is all going to go. Drafting him, I think, is becoming more and more obvious for everybody, and I think it's great because the Bears have done a good job of building up this roster, and the only thing they need is a guy of this talent level. So it all just seems to be too perfect not to happen. Of course, we're going to see how many people show up at Jaden Daniels' and LSU's Pro Day, but I don't think it will be nearly as much as it was here today for Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears. The draft is really going to start after that pick, so once that happens, we're going to see where this all goes. But that's what I took away from Caleb's Pro Day, what he really showed out there. I saw Dan Orlovsky say it was underwhelming, which it does make sense, and I do think it does fit this perfectly, and it just shows what kind of player that Caleb Williams is really overall, that he's just showing less on his Pro Day than most other guys are doing. But that's where it all is at this moment with Caleb Williams and where he stands with the Bears. And that's all the time I'm going to have for you guys on this episode there on that last segment. So, as always, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to follow the network on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and this show, you can go on to the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where all the live entire episodes are. If you want to go back and watch a whole episode, they're all on there. YouTube Shorts on other various topics around the NFL are on there as well. On top of the individual segment videos, if you missed a segment or want to go back and watch a specific segment, I post those on there as well for you guys all to check them out. And as a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more conversations, topics, and stories around the NFL and around football. As always, I want to thank you guys for joining me on this episode. I've been your host, Manny Moradiege, wishing you guys a great weekend, and I will see you guys all next week on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.